Hello and welcome to the third and final part of the Explorer guitar build series. The other two parts can be found on the channel, where I've built the neck, and this part starts off with a little headstock veneer, which I made from Indian rosewood. I made some mother of pearl inlays with my initials as a little logo for the guitar, using the same inlay technique that I used for the fretboard inlays, and glued it to the headstock. I decided to shape the headstock by hand instead of using the router template, simply because the headstock is so narrow and small it would be kind of awkward to balance the router on it. So I figured I would just use some hand tools to get it to the right shape. Also, there's something very calming and meditative about using hand tools instead of using a loud router. And after the better part of an hour, everything started to come into shape, and I was quite happy with the result. I drilled the tuner holes using the hand drill because it was kind of awkward to drill at this angle with the headstock being angled backwards. I did put something hard underneath, but I still caused a little bit of tear out, which I had to fill with some wood filler. I tried to avoid it, but it happened anyway. But these parts would be later covered by the tuners, so it's not a big deal. And I painted the truss rod cavity black to make it look a little nicer. Also, it was time to say goodbye to that remaining piece of wood at the end of the neck blank, which I always used to clamp down or balance the guitar when I was working on it. And I glued on the upper part of the body, which was the part that I sort of scrambled together from two pieces. Using a generous amount of Titebond, I usually like to spread it with my fingers. I know that glue spreaders exist, but I don't know why I feel I have more control over not getting it too messy when I use my fingers. I also clamped the guitar down to a straight wooden blank, and I put some, you probably can't see it here, but I put some plastic tape on the wood so that the guitar wouldn't stick to it, because some Titebond really doesn't stick to plastic at all. And before clamping it up, I removed a little bit of the initial squeeze out. I used some weight plates to try to keep it flush with the table, because when you clamp it up, there might be a tendency to pull it upward a little bit or something, which would be very unfortunate because the top will not fit on there then. So I used some weight plates trying to keep it down. And I also only have 3 of these large clamps. I mean, it's kind of the only purpose that you need these kind of large clamps for, so I only have 3 of them. So it was a bit awkward using the weird Explorer shape and finding edges that you could clamp up, but it ended up working fine if you use the middle and the outer edges. I used the Forstner bit to remove the material where the electronics cavity would be. Using a Forstner bit is just quicker than using a router. Just removes material more efficiently. And since the top would be glued to the body, I could just drill through and didn't have to worry about the depth here. And I then used the templates to route the cavities clean. And I also routed some cable channels that would be hidden under the top for the pickup cables and the switch cables. And I also did some weight relief. I calculated that these around 30 or so holes would create about 100 grams of weight relief, and I figured it was worth it because Explorers are quite large guitars, and well, if I can relieve it by 100 grams, I'll take it. And another thing that came to mind was that I could also dig a little channel for a ground cable from where the tailpiece would be. I did that because drilling for the ground cable is always kind of nerve-wracking. Well, if you've ever done it, you know what I mean. You've got an almost finished guitar and you need to drill that ground cable, and you basically don't see where you're going and what you're doing. And if you don't have enough practice, or if you don't pay enough attention, you might drill through the top or through the back of the guitar, which is an absolute disaster. So I just dug that little channel for the ground cable, which would be hidden by the top anyway. And before gluing on the top, I also put in a cable tree for the switch, so I wouldn't have to fumble it in later. And then the very exciting part of gluing the top on arrived. And I was kind of nervous about it because I knew that I had to use like lots of clamps and everything had to be very tight for a nice result at the end. And this time I did use a glue spreader just because of the sheer amount of glue that I had to use. And in preparation I really collected every single clamp that I could find. As I said in the first part, the inspiration for this project was a Hamer standard kind of Explorer guitar, and these guitars have a binding, but I figured that with a maple top I could just as well go with that faux binding PRS style effect, which I tend to like even more. I mean, why would I route away the wood and replace it with plastic? Just I never got the idea of a plastic binding. But that also meant that the two parts, the top and the body, had to be perfectly flush in terms of being glued together. And as I said, I used a lot of clamps. And also some weight plates so I could put some pressure in the middle. Yeah, this is how it looked. Probably a bit overkill, but the next step was to route the shape of the body, and there was quite a bit of material left to be removed, so I had to go very slowly, and also I only took away about 3 millimeters in depth at a time, just because there was so much material left. And as I said, I tried to go slowly, but I still ended up burning a little bit of the end grain on the sides. It took probably 2 hours or so to remove all that material. And as soon as the body shape was routed, it kind of started looking like a guitar and not like a total mess. Also, the transition between the body and the top was very smooth. And I was quite happy with how everything was coming together at that point. As I said, some end grain got burned, which meant a lot of sanding to do, but not a big deal. For the transition between the fretboard and the body, there was a bit of an overlap from the top, which had to be removed. I sanded it down by hand using a straight sanding beam and being very careful to produce a very straight surface. Also, I drilled the holes for the studs of the tailpiece, checking if these would fit right, and then it was time to glue on the fretboard. I did not protect the truss rod with tape or anything, because the truss rod that I used is covered in plastic, and Titebond just doesn't stick to plastic, so it doesn't really make sense to use the tape. Also, if you use that tape trick where you cover the truss rod channel for gluing it up and then remove it, the squeeze out will work its way to the channel anyway, so it's kind of pointless in my opinion. And after the fretboard was glued on, it was time to shape the neck, which was a lot of work too. I wanted a volute on the guitar for a little bit more stability or material, trying to avoid future headstock cracks. I used some drawings to get a little bit of orientation and ended up with this result as a volute. And I shaped the neck to a relatively thick C shape, or pretty thick actually, like a 58 or 59 Les Paul, that is, being about an inch in thickness at around the 11th fret and a little less than that on the 1st fret. I also created a little bit of a belly cut for more comfort when playing. This is how the neck looked in its shape. And then there was lots of sanding to do in preparation for the finish. This is the kind of stuff that takes the better part of a day. I used True Oil sanding sealer and filler to fill up the pores. I originally planned to go with a True Oil finish, but then ended up using lacquer. But the sealer worked fine anyway. And I used alcohol-based dyes to create the sunburst finish. I used alcohol-based dyes because they dry a lot quicker and they do not tend to raise the grain as much. If you use water-based dyes, they raise a lot of grain, which means you have to do a lot of sanding in between, and you'll sand away lots of the color and have to redo everything quite often. So these alcohol-based dyes worked very nicely, and it was the first time I ever did a sunburst kind of finish, a hand-dropped sunburst. I made a yellow base coat and then did some red and brown coats on the edges, and then started to try to rub and blend everything together. But to be honest, it was kind of a mess, and I ended up sanding everything back around 2 or 3 times. So yeah, it took a lot of practice and patience to get to a decent result. It's one of the things that look a lot easier when somebody does it on YouTube than when you actually do it yourself. But now I think I finally got the trick. And ended up with a more reddish kind of burst. I used a razor blade to then scrape the edges to clean them up a little bit and to put more emphasis on that false binding effect. And I used some nitrocellulose clear to seal everything up and create a clear coat on top. I didn't really have the time to create a full gloss finish, so I went with a more satin kind of finish. If you want a full gloss nitro finish, you need something like 20 coats or so, and it was kind of getting cold and windy outside, and I really didn't have the time to do that, so it's a bit more of a set and finish in the end. I then installed the hardware. The bridge ended up being in a sort of suboptimal position. It should have been a little bit more towards the tailpiece, but it internets perfectly, so it's not a problem. For electronics, I used Tone Rider pickups. These are Tone Rider Rock Song pickups. Basically some overwound PAFs, Alnico 2. I love this pickup set and I can highly recommend it. The wiring is pretty standard. 2 volumes, 1 tone. I installed some treble bleeds on the volume, which you can't see here because there are so many cables in the way. And after 3 weeks of work, the guitar was finished. So it was a very cool project, and the guitar is playing great and it sounds great. It's very unique with the Corina neck-through construction. You rarely ever find a neck-through Explorer. And then with the flame maple top too, it's really a nice instrument that I'm hopefully going to play for a long time, and I'll probably do a separate video on demoing some of the sounds. One thing that I added later was a switch to split the pickups, which was a nice addition. And that's it for this series, so thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe or check out some of my other stuff on the channel, and I'll see you soon.